The Lord be with you. This is a reading of the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee to the shore of Tiberias. A vast crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was performing for the sick. Jesus then went up the mountain, sat down there with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus looked up and caught sight of a vast crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat?" And Philip replied, "Not even with 200 days' wages could we buy loaves enough to give each of them a mouthful." Another of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, remarked to Jesus, well, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and a couple of dried fish, but what good is that for so many? Jesus said, "Well, get the people to recline." And even though the men numbered about 5,000, there was plenty of grass for them to find a place on the ground. Jesus then took the loaves of bread, gave thanks, and passed them around to those reclining there. He did the same with the dried fish, as much as they wanted. When they had had enough, he told his disciples, "Gather up the crusts that are left over so that nothing will go to waste." And at this they gathered 12 baskets full of pieces left over by those who had been fed with the 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. When the people saw the sign he had performed, they began to say, "This is undoubtedly the prophet who is to come into the world." And at that, Jesus realized they would come and carry him off to make him king. So he fled back to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Just so you notice that we have shifted from the Gospel of Mark to the Gospel of John, and we will stay in the Gospel of John for 5 weeks as we walk through the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. So what I'm going to attempt to do, and I'll tell you the significance in a moment, is to give a single sermon in 5 parts for the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. Because it's all about the Eucharist, and as Catholics, we are all about the Eucharist. Amen. So, I would encourage you to come back 5 Sundays in a row, and if you can't, I would encourage you to get online. And catch it there if you can't be here live. I tried this 3 years ago, which was my 2nd month here, when we were just getting used to each other. You remember that? Okay, don't dwell on it. You'll get all distracted and you won't hear a word I say, and that's why I'm not going to dwell on it, because I'll get all distracted and I won't make any sense at all. The multiplication of the loaves and fish. I read all this, so just so you know, I got out my Raymond Brown and I reviewed all that he had to say about this passage, and I'll continue to do that for the 5 Sundays, because he is the authority on the Gospel of John in the Roman Catholic Church. God rest his soul. he pointed out a number of things which I was not completely aware of at all. This is the only miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels, only one. And it's not only recorded 4 times, it's recorded 6 times. In the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, there are 2 multiplication of loaves and fish, one for 5,000 people and one for 4,000 people. Okay? And the frequency of that story being told and retold has to do with what happens on our altar. So that's why we as Catholics need to pay particular attention, because that's what we do every week. Okay, that is the center and heart of our worship, is the Eucharist. And without this story, we would have far less revelation about what we're doing here and why, and the gift that we are being given. The story is a perfect example of what it means that we read the Gospels from start to finish, but we understand every story from finish to start. Okay? Every story in the Gospel we look at in light of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's why they're told. That's how they're told. That is their place in God's revelation to us in his Son, Jesus Christ. Okay? So the meaning of the multiplication of loaves and fish is literally interpreted in the light of the Last Supper, which is interpreted in the light of the passion and death and resurrection of Jesus. Okay? And as we go along through the 6th chapter of John, we'll get that it was so difficult for both the disciples of Jesus and all 5,000 of the Galileans who showed up that day to get what Jesus was doing and why. Because the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus had not happened. And so literally, they couldn't get it. They literally couldn't. Now, up to that point, and really after that point, for the most part, the miracles of Jesus had to do with particular people, whether it was one person or whether it was 10 person like the 10 lepers, but particular people who had obvious needs. Okay, they were blind, they were deaf, they were crippled, they were leprous, they had a demon, they had a hemorrhage, that there were all these very, very specific, obvious, incurable, unfixable needs that only Jesus could do. Okay? And so, just imagining yourself as part of the 5,000, is that John says they came there because of the signs Jesus was performing for the sick. So they came there with the expectation, we're going to see more signs of Jesus for the sick. And so it's like, it's the sick people who were singled out. Okay, you're the one who needs Jesus. We're here to watch. Okay? Kind of, in a way. We're here to be impressed, inspired, whatever. But it really, it's more about them than it's about us. So, when Jesus said to Philip, where are we going to buy bread for all these people? Philip looked at, he had to look at him like he had 2 heads. He said, what are you talking about? And it wasn't just about the 200 days' wages. And it wasn't just about the size of the crowd, although it was. But it was like, why are you even asking that? You've never asked that before. That's never come up. He's kind of like leafing through his notes of Jesus, sermons and miracles. What is this? You never asked that before. And then, of course, Andrew was trying to be helpful and said, well, here's this lad here. He's got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, because he was sent by his parents because they saw 5,000 people come in. They said, it's time to make a little money. So let's bake some barley loaves and dry some fish and take it over there and to sell it, right? Amen? So that's what he was doing there. And so Jesus took the opportunity. And it's in John, this is different from the other 5 accounts. It says Jesus took the loaves and the fish, and he gave thanks, and he distributed them. Wasn't the disciples. And he didn't do it without giving thanks. And the gestures, what he did and what he said, were exactly what he did and said at the Last Supper. Exactly what he did and said at the Last Supper, which is exactly what follows the Passover liturgy. Okay, so all of this is all tied together. It's like 5,000 people were having this Passover liturgy with Jesus, and with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But in the crowd, unlike the other miracles in which these people had these dire needs for Jesus, like they wouldn't have a life if it wasn't for Jesus, what they did with them. In a crowd of 5,000 Galileans, not everybody is poor. Not everybody is even hungry. And not everybody's a saint. Amen? Go figure. 5,000 people from any part of the world. I mean, just picture, okay. So here's this miracle that Jesus is doing for 5,000. And so the question is why? Why are you doing that, and why is that so important? And you don't know until the Passion, Death, and Resurrection, and you don't know until the Last Supper, and you don't know until that is taking place at your altar when you show up on Sunday morning. The answer is coming to us from the Psalm, by the way. It's at Psalm 145. It's the response that came from our own lips. The hand of the Lord feeds us. He answers all our needs. The hand of the Lord feeds us. He answers all our needs. So it's not just my hand feeds us, or the hand of somebody I know, love, and trust feeds us. And it's all of our needs. So it's not just our physical needs to have 3 squares a day or whatever we need to eat. It's all of the needs, including all of the spiritual needs. This particular sign of Jesus can only be interpreted spiritually. It wasn't about a physical hunger or a physical dire need of 5,000 starving people. These were not 5,000 starving people. They didn't need to be physically fed by Jesus. They needed to be spiritually fed by Jesus, which made it harder to get the miracle, which makes it harder to get the miracle of the Eucharist for us. Amen. So, at least this, as I see it, as I'm starting out these 5 weeks, it makes me more humble, which is always good. And you can laugh at that or not. Is we shouldn't be too smug as Catholics that we really know the Eucharist. We shouldn't get too smug about our knowledge and our comprehension and our realization and our appreciation of the revelation of the Eucharist. There's most likely, guaranteed, assuredly, more about what is going on here at this altar every Sunday than any of us and all of us are aware of. Most likely, most assuredly. Which is why we always call it a mystery. Because it always is a mystery. Whoever we are, however long we're alive, how many masses we've gone to, it isn't until we get to the heavenly banquet that maybe we'll begin to know. The hand of the Lord feeds us. He answers all of our needs. Most especially, the spiritual needs we're not aware of, or we're not completely aware of. We're aware of partially. Well, I'm committed to do this. I hope it's worth your while. I hope it's better than it was 3 years ago. We won't go there. But I just hope that it gives us a more humble and a deeper appreciation of what God gives us every time